My wife told me his name was Derek like she was introducing a houseplant. Casual. Practiced. Like she'd rehearsed saying it in the mirror until it stopped sounding like a confession. "He's Mia's biological father," she said. "He deserves to be in her life." I nodded. I didn't say anything. Because the thing she didn't know, the thing nobody in that room knew, was that I had already made a phone call that morning. And by the time she sat down to finish that conversation, certain things were already in motion that couldn't be undone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the house first. I bought that house in 2019. Not we. My name. My credit. My down payment from 7 years of working contracts in industrial project management. A job my wife, Vanessa, never fully understood and never particularly respected. The house was in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus. 4 bedrooms. A finished basement I'd converted into an office. A backyard big enough that Mia, my stepdaughter, used to run laps around it pretending she was training for the Olympics. I loved that kid. I want to be clear about that, because everything that happened after is easier to understand if you know that. I loved Mia like she was mine. I coached her soccer team for 2 seasons. I drove her to school 412 mornings in a row. I know that number because I counted once, just because she asked me how many times I'd picked her up, and I sat there and actually did the math on my phone in the parking lot while she laughed at me. 412 mornings. Derek had been to 3 of her birthday parties in 9 years. 3. Vanessa and I had been married for 6 years. And for most of those 6 years, Derek was a name that floated around the edges of our life the way bad weather floats around the edges of a road trip, always somewhere on the horizon, never quite landing. He paid child support sporadically. He'd call Mia sometimes, forget to call again, promise things, disappear. I watched Mia wait by the door once for 2.5 hours for a pickup that never came. She was 8. She didn't cry. She just went upstairs and reorganized her bookshelves, which was what she did when she didn't want anyone to see her face. I knocked on her door and asked if she wanted to watch a movie. She said yes. We watched 3. That was the version of Derek I knew. The version Vanessa had apparently been in contact with for longer than she admitted. I found out about the dinners in January. Not from Vanessa. From a parking receipt that fell out of her coat pocket when I was hanging it up. A restaurant 40 minutes away from our neighborhood. A place we'd never been together. The date on the receipt was a Tuesday, the Tuesday she told me she had a work thing that ran late. I didn't say anything that night. I'm not an impulsive person. It's something people who've underestimated me have discovered at significant cost. I sat with it. I watched. I paid attention. By the end of February, I had found 4 more receipts, 2 calendar entries she'd forgotten to hide, and a text thread that appeared on her screen one night when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I didn't read the whole thread. I didn't need to. The 3 words I caught were enough. Can't wait. Soon. She told me about Derek in March. Told me he'd gotten serious about being present in Mia's life. Told me she thought it was important for Mia to have a relationship with her biological father. That was the word she kept using. Biological. Like it was a scientific argument. Like biology was the only thing that counted and the previous 6 years were just a long experiment with no statistically significant results. I said, "Where is he living right now?" She paused just a little too long. "He's between places," she said. There it was. "You want him to move in here?" I said. I said it flat, not as a question. She said it would only be temporary. She said it was for Mia. She said a lot of things after that, but those were the only ones that mattered, because they told me everything I needed to know about how she'd already decided this conversation would go. She had rehearsed her reasons. She had not prepared for my silence. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't say a single word that she could later describe to anyone as volatile or aggressive. I just looked at her and said, "I need to think about it." And then I went to my office in the basement, and I made a phone call. What Vanessa didn't know, what she had never bothered to know, actually, because my work was something she tuned out at dinner parties and politely redirected away from at family gatherings, was that I had not been sitting still for 6 years. While she was explaining to her friends that I did something with industrial contracts, I had quietly built a consulting practice that billed $840,000 the previous year. I had 3 long-term clients. I had referrals I hadn't taken yet because I didn't need to. I had a separate business account she didn't know the balance of because she had never once asked. She knew we were comfortable. She did not know the exact shape of that comfort. People rarely know what they're standing on until it moves. The house was mine. That's the part one wants to be precise about, because it matters legally, financially, and in every other way that has consequences. When we married, Vanessa had significant credit card debt and a lease on an apartment she was 2 months behind on. We had talked, vaguely, about putting the house in both names. We had never done it. It was on a list somewhere. Life happened. It stayed in my name. I had never pushed to change it. I had not been careless. I had been patient. The morning after Vanessa asked me to let Derek move into my house, I called my real estate attorney. Her name is Carol. She's been my attorney since the first property deal I did in 2017. She doesn't waste words and she doesn't ask unnecessary questions. I told her I wanted to list the house. She said, "Timeline?" I said, "How fast can you move?" She said she could have paperwork ready in 4 business days. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions of everything. I came upstairs for dinner. I helped Mia with a history project on Thursday night, the American Industrial Revolution, which felt like a private joke the universe was making specifically for me. I watched television with Vanessa on Friday. She seemed relieved. She had interpreted my silence as reluctant acceptance. She was not the first person to misread my silence that way. Derek came over that Sunday. Vanessa had clearly presented this as a done deal. He walked through my front door with a confidence that I recognized immediately, the confidence of a man who has been told there's no resistance coming. He shook my hand. He had a firm grip and direct eye contact that he'd clearly practiced. I smiled at him. He smiled back. Mia watched us both from the top of the stairs like she was calculating something she didn't have a name for yet. Vanessa had been planning a birthday dinner for her friend Carolyn the following Saturday. It had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. Dinner at a restaurant downtown, 8 people, 7 o'clock reservation. She asked me Thursday if I was still going. I said I had some work I needed to catch up on and she should go without me. She hesitated. For a moment I thought she was going to push. Then she said that was fine, and she kissed me on the cheek in the way that people kiss other people when they have already moved on emotionally and the physical gesture is just a habit running on fumes. She left at 6:30 on Saturday. Mia was at a sleepover. At 7:15, Carol arrived with the documents. I want to tell you what it felt like to sit at my kitchen table and sign those papers, because I think people assume it must have felt either devastating or triumphant, and it was either. It felt clear. That's the only word for it. Like a window you've been looking through for years, fogged up and distorted, and someone finally opens it, and the air comes in sharp and cold and completely honest. I signed my name in 4 places. Carol witnessed it. I wrote a check from my business account for her fee. She left at 8:05. I sat in the kitchen for a while after that. I made coffee. I looked out at the backyard in the dark. I thought about Mia running her fake Olympic laps. Then I went to the basement and started packing. I had been moving things out in stages for 11 days. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself. Just steadily. The things that were mine, equipment, files, about 30 boxes of work materials, my grandfather's tools from the garage, the paintings I'd bought at an auction in 2021 that Vanessa had always said she liked but couldn't name if you asked her. A storage unit 6 miles away had been filling up quietly, trip by trip, mostly on mornings when Vanessa left early and Mia was at school. By Saturday night, what remained in that house was furniture, Vanessa's belongings, Mia's room exactly as it was, and the kitchen contents. I left those deliberately. I left the home functional. I wasn't burning anything down. I was simply removing myself from it. There's a difference. A significant one. I checked into a furnished apartment that Sunday morning. I had signed a 3-month lease the week prior. It was 11 minutes from Mia's school. I had thought about that when I chose it. I texted Vanessa at 9:47 a.m. The text said, "I've moved out. The house is listed for sale. Carol has the details. You'll receive formal notice this week. I've already spoken to my attorney about next steps. I'm not angry. I just stopped being willing." She called back in 4 minutes. I didn't answer. She called again. And again. 9 calls in 37 minutes. I know because my phone logged them, and I looked at the log later that morning the way you look at a receipt after an expensive meal, just confirming what you already knew you'd spent. The 10th call, I picked up. She was not screaming. She was doing something I'd seen her do exactly twice in 6 years. She was crying in that flat, disoriented way that means the person hasn't fully caught up to their own reality yet. Like the information has arrived but the nervous system is still processing the invoice. "You can't sell the house," she said. "That's our house." "It's my house," I said. "It has been since 2019. You can verify that with the county recorder's office if you'd like. Carol can also walk you through the listing timeline." Silence. "Where are you?" she said. "Somewhere else," I said. The listing went live on Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, there were 6 showing requests. By Thursday, there were 2 offers. The house sold in 11 days for $43,000 over asking price. The Columbus market had been doing things like that all year, and I had been watching it the way you watch whether you're planning to use. Carol called me when the offer was accepted. Her voice had that careful, professional neutrality that I've always appreciated about her. "Congratulations," she said. "Do you want me to send a copy of the accepted offer to opposing counsel?" "Please," I said. Vanessa had retained a family attorney by that point. There were arguments made. There were phone calls between lawyers. There were claims about contributions to the household, about the nature of the marriage, about the length of the relationship. There were a lot of words that cost a lot of money to say and accomplish very little. The house was in my name. It had been in my name for 5 years before the marriage and throughout the marriage. There had been no agreement, formal or informal, transferring any ownership interest. I had documentation for every mortgage payment, every tax payment, every repair, every renovation. Every single one. I had not been careless with paper. The case was reviewed. The arguments were heard. The outcome was what the paperwork said it was. Derek, as far as I know, did not move in. There was nothing to move into. There was a sold sign in the yard within 3 weeks of the night Vanessa had gone to that dinner, and a family that wasn't mine moving boxes through a door that was no longer mine to close. Vanessa rented an apartment. A 2-bedroom, based on what Mia told me when I picked her up for our first weekend together after the separation. She said it was okay. She said the closet in her room was smaller. She asked me if I had a backyard. I told her not yet, but I was looking. She said, "Can we pick it together?" I said, "Absolutely." The thing about people who underestimate you is that they're usually not paying attention. They have a version of you that is convenient for them, useful in certain ways, invisible in others, and they maintain that version because updating it would require them to acknowledge what they missed. Vanessa had a version of me that was stable and quiet, and would absorb whatever was placed on top of him and remain functional. She had tested that version many times over 6 years and it had always held up. She had just never tested what happened when I decided to stop. I want to be careful here, because people sometimes hear a story like this and want to make it simple. They want a villain and a hero and a clean moral at the end. I don't think it's that simple. Vanessa made choices. So did I. Derek was mostly just a man who walked through a door he'd been told was open, and then it turned out the door belonged to someone else, and that someone had already begun the process of removing it from the wall. What I can say is this: I was not a man who yelled. I was not a man who threatened. I was not a man who made scenes or sent long angry texts or called her friends to explain my side. I was a man who read the situation clearly, made decisions quietly, and executed them without announcement. That is, apparently, the thing that scared her most. It's been 14 months since the house sold. I bought a property in March. 3 bedrooms, a proper yard, a garage big enough for the workbench I'd been planning for years. It's in my name. It will stay that way. Mia spent her last 4 weekends with me. She brought her soccer cleats. We found a league she can join in the fall. Last Sunday she sat on the kitchen counter while I made breakfast and told me about a book she was reading about a girl who runs away to sea and becomes a navigator, and she talked for 45 minutes straight, and I didn't interrupt once because there is nothing on earth I would trade for 45 uninterrupted minutes of that kid talking about a book. 412 mornings. More to come. Vanessa called me in February. Not her lawyer. Her directly. It was a Sunday evening, and I almost didn't pick up, but something in me decided to. She said, "I didn't think you'd actually do it." I said, "I know." She said, "Was there any point where you would have stayed?" I thought about it. Genuinely. Not for dramatic effect. "No," I said. "Not after March." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I should have known what I had." I didn't respond to that. Not because I was being cruel. Because I agreed with her, and saying so out loud would have sounded like an invitation I wasn't extending. We said goodbye. She hung up. I set my phone down on the counter of a kitchen that was mine. Outside, the yard was dark. But it was my yard. And tomorrow, I was taking Mia to look at soccer goals.